So OP07 is a casual stroll around the block from being here, and that means we've got to get ready for it. And today we're going to start a couple of videos that we're going to be looking forward to OP07 and talking about things that will help us be well prepared. Now in today's video we're going to be looking at the OP07 meta, mainly like the top contenders, the meta decks. We're going to be looking at some of their lists so you know what cards to pick up for them so you can be ready to rock and roll if you want to play in that competitive scene.
Oh, this sounds good.
Yeah. Now, as per usual, we'll be having our pre-release tips coming out in a video as well, and we will also be having a look at some rough deck lists for all the new leaders coming out in OP07. So you guys want to be up to date when those videos do drop, make sure you are subscribed and you ring that little notification bell so that you don't miss out. So now let's just jump straight into the OP07 meta. It's actually a meta I'm pretty excited for because it is fairly diverse. Now over in the Japan scene, there were 6 decks that saw at least 20 tops in a wide variety of tournaments. So it's actually really exciting. It's not just one deck dominating, but there are a few contenders there, which is really nice.
Breath of fresh air.
So let's go through those top 6 leaders and then we'll have a little look at some deck profiles of some topping lists of each of those leaders. So number 1 on that list is Red Purple Law. Number 2 on the list is OP07 Lucci, a nice new leader, which is really cool. The 3rd on the list is Anel. 4th is Bonnie from OP07. 5th is Black Yellow Luffy, the starter deck Luffy, and 6th is Gecko Moria. Now let's jump over to One Piece top decks and take a look at the top dog, the top contender, Red Purple Law, that definitely saw the most tops in the Japanese meta. Clears the next one, Lucci, by at least 10 topping lists, but we'll break down each of them here. So Law, for those of you who may have not have seen Law for some reason, it's been running around the current meta, but Law is a Red Purple leader, 5,000 power, 4 life. The effect is activate main once per turn. You can return 3 Don to your Don deck and you bottom deck one of your opponent's characters with 3,000 power or less, and then you can play out a character with a cost of 4 or less from your hand. So if we're looking at the first list here, our first place list here in a 3-on-3 tournament, but in Law decks, typically you have cards that help reduce your opponent's power so you can trigger your leader's ability. So let's first look at those cards in this build. So we're first of all running 3 copies of Otama here in this build, a 2k counter. On play you can minus something by 2,000 power. We're running 4 copies of the Promo Gordon, which is a 1-cost character. Activate main, you can bottom deck Gordon to minus something by 3,000 power. We're also running 4 copies of Raise Max, which is the exact same effect as the Promo Gordon. And that's it for the power reduction characters in this build. So you're running 4, 8, 11 power reduction characters. Now, because of our leader ability, we're going to be minusing Don quite a lot. So the other big portion of this deck is cards that help you recover your Don. So let's take a look at those. First one on the list here is Ain from starter deck 5, running full playset of it. On play, you can add 1 Don card from your Don deck rested, a great one to play out off your leader's ability. Next up, we're running 2 copies here of Miss All Sunday, a card that's probably seen a bit more play going into the later stages of our OP06 meta, but is a 5-cost character, so you can't play it out off your leader's ability, but can be triggered out off life for minusing 2 Don, but on play you can ramp a Don, and then if you have 6 or more Don cards, you have to draw a card, which is actually fairly nice for Red Purple Law. We've got your Sachi and Penguin as well, which is on play. If you have 3 or less Don, you can add 2 Don cards from your Don deck and set them as rested. The next one they're running, if running a full play set here in this build, is Zorojoro. This one, probably not seeing a lot of play currently in our meta, but a 3-cost character that when you're attacking, if you have 3 or less life, you can ramp yourself a Don. Next up, we have Captain Kidd, which we're running a full play set of here in this list as well. A 5-cost character, so can't be played out off your leader's ability, but is a blocker, but the other effect is what's really important for our Don management. Your turn once per turn when a Don card is returned to your Don deck, you can bring one back as active. So having multiple of these out is actually really good for you. And the last card that helps us to ramp our Don is we're running a full playset of the Mr. 2 Bonclave from EB01. On play, you can ramp yourself a Don as active. And the other part of the effect, when attacking, you can copy something's attack, which is really nice. So the rest of the cards that make up this current build are just some tech cards. So let's go through the rest of them here. This one's running 4 copies of Shariah, just a blocker that copies your opponent's leader's attack when attacking and when blocking. So that can be really good. Basically, you're always going to need a 1k counter whenever your leader's swinging. Next, we're running a full playset of Kid and Killer from AB01. It's just a rush card that becomes 7,000 attack when your opponent has 2 or less life. So a great one to play out late game. If you have multiple in your hand late game, absolutely insane as well. We've got Queen, who's a blocker, but also helps us with our draw power. On play, you don -1, draw 2, trash 1, so it helps you filter your hand, find those cost reduction stuff, or find your ramping stuff, whatever you're missing. We've got 4 copies of Reiju here in this list. This one is just great for your draw power. On play, if you have equal or less don than your opponent, you can draw 2 cards as long as you have 5 cards or less. And then the only new card coming out of OP07 that we're running here in this deck, just 2 copies of this version, is the Sanji, which is a 6 cost character. But when you have 2 or more don less than your opponent, hopefully that makes sense, this character becomes a 3 cost in your hand, so you can play it out with your leader's ability. All right, let's take another look at another first place list here. This one looking fairly similar. We've got 2 Otamas this time. We've still got 4 Gordons. We've got 2 Shiraias this time. We still have the 4 Raise Max, still have the 4 Kid and Killer. But this time we're running 4 copies of Tony Chopper. This is from EB01, a 3 cost 4,000 power blocker, don ×2 when attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters -3,000 power for the turn. So just another great option to get some power reduction going on. Still running 3 copies of Queen, or 3 copies of Queen. Last one ran 4. Still 4 copies of Ain, 3 copies this time of Miss All Sunday, your 4 copies of Sachi and Penguin, your 4 Captain Kid, your 4 Reiju, your 4 Bon Clay, and then this time 4 copies of Sanji. So not a whole lot of variance here. Chopper's the only kind of big difference going on here in this list. Let's take another look at another first place. This one running a bit more Rush going on here. So we got a 1 copy of the Rush. Sorry, this one's probably seeing more play in our current meta. We've got 4 copies of Gordon, this time 2 copies of Ace. Ace doesn't get the Rush, but you can -2 things by 3,000 power, which is handy. Running 3 copies of Shiraiya in this one, 4 copies of Raise Max, 4 copies of Kid and Killer, 2 copies of the Tony Chopper here in this build. We've got 3 copies of Queen, 4 copies of Ain, 4 of Sachi and Penguin, 3 of the blocker lore from starter deck 10. So this one can be played off your leader's ability. Nice to be able to have another blocker you can do that with. And then on play don -1, if your opponent has 7 or more cards in the hand, you trash 2 of them, which is quite good for those decks that like to have that big hand size. So that's probably another one worthwhile maybe picking up. We've got your 4 copies of Kid, your 4 copies of Reiju, your 4 copies of Bon Clay, and then your 4 copies of Sanji. All right, let's take a look at another one. This is another first place one. You can see we're going to a lot of similarities here. 4 copies of Gordon, 4 copies of Raise Max, 4 Kid and Killer, 4 Chop Off, 3 Queen, 4 Ain, 1 Miss All Sunday in this one, 4 Sachi Penguin, 3 Lore in this one, 4 Kid, 4 Reiju, 4 Bon Clay, 2 Sanji. So you can see a bit of a trend going on here. And rounding off, let's take a look at one more list here. This one went 10-0, first place twice, which is wild. This one is slightly different, maybe a little bit more suited to what we're currently seeing in our red purple lore builds. So we got 2 Zoro, Rush to Zoro here. We have 4 of the promo lore, which is on play -something by 2,000 power. 2 Gordon this time, we've got 2 Ace, we've got 3 Shiraiya, 4 Raise Max, 4 Kid and Killer, 4 Ain, 4 Sachi Penguin, 4 Lore, 2 Beppo, which is a card we haven't seen in any of the lists before, but is currently run in lists now. On play when attacking, if your opponent has more Don cards than you get to ramp 1 as rested. We got 4 Kid, 4 Reiju, 4 Bon Clay, and then 4 Sanji. All right, moving on to the deck that had the second most tops over in the Japan meta of OP07 is a brand new one in Rob Lucci. So for those that haven't seen Lucci before, mono black leader, starts you with 5,000 power and 5 life. When attacking, you may trash 2 cards from the top of your deck, give one of your opponent's characters -1 cost for the turn. So we see some things in here that we've seen before in black. We know some black decks that like to trash. We got your Gecko Morai, your Rebecca, even your Sakazuki. And then we run to your typical black stuff where we're manipulating cost, getting some good cost reduction stuff going on there. So if we take a look at a first place list here, let's go with cards that first of all help support our leader's ability, getting some good cost reduction. So this one we're running 2 copies of Helmeppo from starter deck 6. On play, give something -3 cost for the turn. This one's running 1 copy of Suru, which is 2k counter. On play, gives something -2 cost during the turn. Next, we're running 4 copies of Khalifa from OP03. This is on play, draw 2, trash 2, so it helps you with your filtering. And then you can give one of your opponent's characters -2 cost during the turn. The next one that falls into our cost reduction stuff is Brook, also falls into our KO category as well, running 2 copies in this list here. On play, when attacking, give up to one of your opponent's characters -1 cost, and then you can KO something that has a 0 cost. Next, we're moving on to a new card from OP07, running 2 copies of this in this build, which is Kaku, cost you 4, also a 2k counter. On play, you can place 2 cards with CP in their type from your trash at the bottom of your deck, and then you can give one of your opponent's characters -3 cost during the turn. Next one, we're running 1 copy of Ice Age, which is I'll cost you 1 minus something by 5 cost. The trigger is you can KO something 3 cost or less, which is quite handy as well. And then we're running 4 copies of A Stage, Any's Lobby from OP03, cost you 2, activate main. You arrest the stage. If your leader has CP in its type, one of your opponent's characters gains -2 cost during the turn. And rounding off our cost reduction cards, we have Tempest Kick, which is basically Great Eruption, but just a little bit better, but it is locked to CP9 builds. So cost you 1, you draw a card, then if you have 10 or more cards in your trash, you can minus one of your opponent's characters by 3 cost during the turn. And that's quite easy to achieve with Rob Lucci because of our leader's ability. All right, let's now talk about our KOing cards that we have available to us in this deck. First of all, running a full playset of Kaku from OP03. On play, you can return 2 cards with CP in their type from your trash to the bottom of your deck. Then you can KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 3 or less. We are running a full playset of Rob Lucci in this build as well. 4 cost. On play, place 3 cards from your trash at the bottom of your deck in any order. Then KO a character with a cost of 2 or less and a character with a cost of 1 or less. We've already mentioned Brook here with the 2 copies. The other card that helps us with our removal is running 2 copies of a new card. Stussy from OP07, a super rare. On play, you may place one of your characters into the trash and you can KO anything. So this one doesn't really play into that cost reduction stuff that Black has. You can just KO anything. You just have to kill one of your own characters as well. All right, now looking at cards that can help us recycle our KO effects or our cost reduction effect cards. First of all, running Rebecca here. We've all seen Rebecca quite often here. 4 cost on play, you can return something between a 3 or 7 cost to your hand, and then you can play out something with a 3 cost or less. So with Rebecca, we're recycling all of our KOing stuff. We can't really recycle a lot of our cost reduction stuff here with Rebecca, but our KOing stuff we definitely can. You can add the Kaku back to your hand, you can add the Lucci back to your hand, then play the Lucci, you can add the Brook back to your hand, then play the Brook. Great combinations going on there. Next up, we've got a full playset of Gecko Moria. We've seen Gecko Moria as well, also a great card going into the next meta. On play, you can play a character with a cost of 4 or less, and you can play a character with a cost of 2 or less, 1 active, 1 rested. This one we can recycle our Lucci, our Brook in terms of our KOing stuff. We can recycle pretty much all of our cost reduction stuff except for the Suru. And lastly, for our recycling stuff, we've got Spandine, which is a 3 cost, 2000 power character from EB01. On play, you may return 3 cards with CP in their type from your trash to the bottom of your deck. Then you can play 1 character with a cost of 4 or lower with CP in its type from your trash other than itself. So this one we can recycle our Kalify here, and we can recycle our Kaku here in terms of our cost reduction stuff going on there. And we can recycle our Rob Lucci in terms of our KOing stuff there. Now filling in the gaps of this deck, we're running 2 copies of Borsalino, just a great blocker, can't be KO'd, so really good in terms of like the mirror match stuff. We've got a full playset of Sabo, also once again great blocker into the mirror match, protects everything, really nice. And the final 4 spots in the deck is our searcher for the CP9 stuff in Spandam. Now let's take another quick squiz at another version of Rob Lucci. This one is a 2nd place list here, looking fairly similar. This time we're running 4 Borsalino, we've got 2 Helmeppo, 1 Suru, similar combinations there. For the 4 Kaku, 4 Khalifa, 4 Spandam, 3 Sobo this time, the 3 Rebecca, 4 Lucci, 4 Gecko Moria, 2 Spandine. This one is running a new card in 2 copies of Sabo, which is one of the secret rares from OP07, cost you 8, 9,000. Body. On play, you can trash 1 card from your hand, KO one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 5 or less, and a character with a cost of 3 or less. So double KOing just like the Lucci, just a bit bigger. 3 copies of Kaku in this list, 4 copies of Lomi, 2 copies of Finger Pistol, I think it's called in English here, cost you 4, main, you trash 2 cards from your deck, KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, which is really good. And then running a full playset of Tempest Kick, because why not? It's just good. All right, let's take a squiz at one other list here. We've got 2nd place for a 300-man tournament. This one's gonna look fairly similar as well. We got 3 copies of Borsalino, 3 copies of Suru this time. This one's running Isho as one of the boss monsters here. 8 cost, 9,000 body from OP03. Don times 1, all your opponent's characters gain -3 cost. And then on play, if your opponent has 6 or more cards in their hand, they trash 2. So a great way to control hand and board cost stuff going on there. 3 copies of Kaku this time, 3 of Khalifa, 4 Spandam, 2 Sabos this time, 3 Rebecca's, 3 Luchis, 4 Gecko Morias, 1 Hogback in this list, which is actually really interesting because it just helps you recycle the Gecko Moria. That's the only thing in this list from what I understand. This one's running 4 copies of Brook from OP06, which is actually a really interesting tech. Cost is 6,000 body. On play, you can choose one of the following. Put one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less in trash. That avoids KO effects. And then the other part of this effect is you can put 3 cards from your opponent's trash at the bottom of the deck in any order, which is really nice going into the mirror match, I guess. I think that's what tech is used for. Just helps you control your opponent's trash size. So maybe they can't get effects like the Tempest Kick, or you don't want them to recycle certain cost reduction or KOing characters. Yeah, so it can be really good Brook as a tech. Running 2 copies of Spandine, once again 2 copies of the Sabo, 2 copies of Kaku, 1 copy of Stasi, so a few bigger ones in this build here. 2 Ice Age, 1 Ennie's Lobby only here, and then 4 copies of Tempest Kick. Alright, let's move on to Enel. Mono yellow leader, 5,000 power, starts you with 4 life. Opponent's turn, once per turn. When your life hits 0, you may place the top card of your deck on top of your life, and then you can trash 1 card from your hand. Or just important to keep in mind that the recover effect happens before the trashing effect, so you can have no cards in your hand and still recover at that point. So typically Enel takes a little bit of shift. We're kind of seeing this shift currently in our meta. Enel goes from more of an aggro to more of a board control, kind of real grindy deck. It's a deck you don't really mind going down to 1 life pretty quickly, because you've got ways to really help you stay at 1 life or maybe 2 life and just grind a lot of decks to dust. So let's first take a look at some cards that help us with that, maintaining that 1 or 2 life. This one's running 4 copies of Katakuri. So Katakuri's on play, you can add a character with a cost of 8 or less to the top or bottom of the owner's life face up. So you can do that with your own characters, you can do it with your opponent's characters. So if you're thinking about doing with your own, you're typically going to go for the Shirahoshi, which we're running this build of 4 copies, your Onami, which we're running 4 copies as well, or you also want to do the manipulation to Frankie, which is a new card from OP07, which we're running 2 copies of, which we will talk about in a moment as well. Next, we're running 4 copies of Yamato. This is another card that helps us with that life manipulation. On play, you can KO something that has a cost equal to or less than you and your opponent's life combined together, and then if you're at 1 or less life, you can recover a life. So that's really good late game Yamato. So 4 copies going on right there. Next, we're running 4 copies of a new card, the other secret rare from OP07, which is Ace. Costs you 10,000 body, actually quite scary. On play, you can add 1 card from the top of your deck to your life, so straight away we're getting a recover. Then if we have 2 life or less, this then gains rush, which is absolutely wild, so maxing out on this one here. And finally, the other card that helps us to manipulate our life, which is more so found in the trigger, and we're running a full play set of You're the One Who Should Disappear, 0 cost event, which buffs something by 3,000, but the trigger is if we had 0 life, we can put the top card of our deck to our life, and then we can trash a card, basically the same kind of effect as the Enel leader. And when you do hit this as your last life, you trigger this effect, and you also trigger Enel's effect at the same time, so you end up going to 2 life, which is absolutely insane. Now next, let's talk about the removal effects that are available in this deck. As I said, we're kind of shifting more to a grindy kind of let's control the board thing. We've already spoken about Katakuri, which helps us to kind of do that already, and we've spoken about Yamato, which also gives us that KOing ability. The next one which we're running is a full playset of Gadatsu. Cost you 5, you can KO something that has a cost equal to or less than your opponent's life. The other one that we're running is a Onami. So this one is found in the trigger. So the trigger is you can KO something with a cost of 5 or less. The on play is you can give something banish, which is a really nice combination with Katakuri. We mentioned it briefly when we were talking about Katakuri. So a great way you can do this is you can play out the Onami, you can give banish to one of your bigger characters like a Yamato, or your ace, or even your leader. You swing in, try and draw some cards out of your opponent's hand, or they just trash that life, and then you play out the Katakuri and you put Onami at the top of your life, and then you're KOing something when your opponent swings. Next, we're running 2 copies of Luffy from OP07. So this one KOs on both the trigger and the activate main kind of thing. So activate main, you may place this character in your trash. If you have 2 or less life cards, then you can KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less, then draw a card. Really good value. And then triggers, you can KO something with a cost of 4 or less. And then to round off the KOing cards, we have full playset of Rayago, which it's not called this in English, is it? I'm mentally blanking on what it is, but as 6 cost, you can KO anything, but then you have to go down to 1 life. But that really doesn't matter with Enel. You're pretty much always wanting to be around that 1 life. So this is basically 6 cost to KO anything, which is wild. All right, well, let's talk about the classic yellow stuff, the insane triggers. So we've mentioned Shirahoshi, which is a trigger to play it, on play, draw 2, trash 2. Great way to filter your hand. We got 4 copies of Capone. Trigger, stop something from attacking. We mentioned the Onami already. We got a new card in Frankie, 2 copies of Frankie, which is a 2k counter as well. Cost you 4. Trigger, you can draw 1 card. Then if you have 1 life or less, you can play this card. So this is what I'm talking about, a great way to manipulate Frankie into your life with Katakuri, because then you can get triggered out, you can draw a card and play him back out as well. We mentioned the Luffy's trigger that helps us to KO, which is really insane there. We've got to mention the trigger effect from this card, which I still can't remember the name of. The trigger is you can KO one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than you and your opponent's life combined together. It's basically Yamato's KOing effect right there. And then the rest of the deck is basically just filled up with some vanillas, some big boys that help you get some good board presence. You got 4 copies of the Perospero from OP04, and then 2 copies from the Compot from EB01. One card we did almost forget to mention here, running a full playset of Flampe. So Flampe is really good because there's some decks which will kind of like hold off on you, won't swing into you too much, and your Flampe allows you to then kind of counteract that, but you just kind of be aggressively going into 1 life anyway with Enel. So regardless if they're swinging or not, you usually want to play this out so you can pick up a life and then draw a card. Now let's take another look at another first place deck list here, looking fairly similar. We've got 4 Shirahoshi, 4 Katakuri, 4 Capone, 4 Yamato. This is just basically a vanilla. This is a Momo promo. The exact same stat lines as the Perospero, so just you can run that instead. Be easier for you to find and get. 4 Gadatsu. This one's running 2 Hayori. This one helps you manipulate that top life. So on play, you can take the top or bottom card of your life to your hand and then replace the top life card with something from your hand. So you can put those good triggers in there, which is really nice. This one's running 2 copies of the Rush Ace from Starter Deck 13, just a way to be a bit more aggressive, controlling the board a bit that way. Running 4 Flampe's. This one's also running 2 Shirahoshi. So this one's a 2 cost blocker. When it's KO'd by opponent's effect, you get to recover a life, which is really nice. Running 3 Frankies this time, still 4 aces. This one's running 1 Armaru. So Armaru typically was used as like a finisher in yellow, but in Enel right now, especially in the OP07 kind of builds, it's used as just another way to control the board. You can rest one of your opponent's characters, then swing into it with whatever you've buffed off this. And the trigger is another great way to kind of recover. And then running 4 copies of you should be the one to disappear, and then 4 copies of this giant ball thingy. Let's take a squiz at one other one that went a 7-0 first place. It was a 4-on-4 tournament. Running 4 copies of Shirahoshi, 4 Katakuri, 4 Capone, 4 Yamato, 4 Gadatsu, 4 Onami. This one's running Okiku at 4 copies. On KO, if your opponent has 3 or less life, you get to recover a life, and then trigger, if your opponent has 3 or less life, you get to play it out. So nice in both ways right there, Okiko. Running 2 copies of Hayori, 2 copies of the Rush Ace here again, 1 copy of the Shirahoshi, 4 Frankies here, 3 Luffy's in this one, 4 of the Secret Rare Ace, 2 Armarus, 2 Disappears, and 2 giant balls. All right, now moving on to another one of the newer leaders, which is Jewelry Bonnie, a mono green leader starting with 5 life and 5,000 power. The effect for Bonnie is on your opponent's attack once per turn, you can rest a Don. You can then rest one of your opponent's leaders or characters. So making your opponent always have 1 less attack each turn. Now there are a few different variants of Bonnie out there. So this one that we're first going to have a look at is the first place at a Junior Cup. Kind of does similar to what we've seen with Fortress Yamato in our current meta, splitting between Don Quixote family stuff and Supernova stuff here. So if we look at the Supernova stuff first, here we've got 4 copies of the Bonnie as the Searcher. And then we got 2 copies of the Captain Kidd, which is basically part of your brick wall. A cost when there's a Don attached to it and it's rested, your opponent has to attack it. And then part of the activate main is you can rest it to bring out a character with a cost of 3 or less. So off the Bonnie are other targets that we have. 4 copies of Cavendish from EB01. This is a 5 cost, 6,000 body, 1,000 counter character on play when attacking. If your leader is Supernova, which Bonnie is, and you have no other Cavendish on the field, you can make 2 Don active, which is really nice. You can use those 2 Don elsewhere. Scratch Poo is a searchable 2k counter of Bonnie from EB01. The effect doesn't really come up too much. Urogue is another new card which is running a full playset of, which is searchable if you're Bonnie, 4-cost blocker, end of your turn set one of your Don cards as active. So that really helps with your leader's ability, so you can always use that ability. And then finally, the last searchable card of Bonnie, we're running 4 copies of a brand new Hawkins, 6 cost 7,000 body. If your leader is Supernova, this character gains blocker, which it is, so it's always going to be a nice big blocker. Then once per turn, if this character were to be removed from play, so similar to a Nell, so not just KO'd, or it covers bottom decking, covers returning to hand. If it's going to be removed from play, you can rest one of your opponent's characters instead. Absolutely wild. Now moving on to the other half. So as I mentioned, Don Quixote Pirates is the other half of this one here. So we're running 4 copies of the Baby 5 Searcher. So stuff that we can search off that here. We've got 2 copies of a 2k counter in Viola. We're running 4 copies of the Big Boy Doflamingo, which stuns 3 things for the next turn. Running 4 copies of another 2k counter in Baby 5. Running 4 copies of Rosinante, which really helps you protect your kid and is also a nice blocker. And we're running 3 copies of the 0 cost event. Buff something by 3,000. Or the trigger is to rest one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or less. And the remaining 2 cards that we haven't looked at in the deck are kind of like the finishers for the deck. So we're running 3 copies of the Secret Rare Zorro from OP07. If this card sticks, you're probably winning the next turn or the turn after that. Just the 3 attacks is just absolutely immense with this. And then running 4 copies of Haughty Jones, 7 cost, rush, on play, rest 2 things that are either Don or characters or a mix of both. All right, let's jump over to another first place list from a flagship event here. This one's leaning a bit more into just the Supernova kind of things here. So we got, once again, 4 copies of Bonnie, we got 4 copies of Kid, we got 4 copies of the other Scratchman Apu, which is a searchable 2k counter. And we're also running 4 copies of the new one, 4 copies of the Cavendish, 4 copies of the Euro, 4 copies of the Hawkins, and then 4 copies of a Bart, which is also a searchable, a blocker. Your turn, once per turn, if a character is rested from your own effects, you can draw 1 card and discard 1 card. So this ties well with the Kid. The Kid's effect is to rest one of your own things, which allows you to trigger that draw. You can also use it when your Bonnie's out in the field as well. So early game, you can get some good draw power going on from the Bonnie and from the Bart. The other cards that we're running in here, running a full play set of the Ezo staple kind of 2k counter in green, allows you to rest something on play with a cost of 4 or less. Running 4 copies of the Rosinante, which just really helps protect the Captain Kid. 4 copies of the Zorro, 4 copies of Haughty Jones, so maxing out those big boy finishes, and then 2 copies of the 0 cost event. Next up, we're going to have a look at another Bonnie list, one more. This is a top 4 from a flagship event. This one is a bit of a mix between the 2 Supernova and Don Quixote family stuff, but slightly different take on it. So in terms of the Supernova stuff, we've got a Bonnie, 4 copies. 2 copies of X-Drake, on play KO, arrested 4 cost or less character. Ties in well with something we'll talk about a little bit later here. No spoilers with my mouse wiggling around it. Running 4 copies of the Cavendish, 2 copies of the Scratchman Apu, 4 Euro, 4 Hawkins, and then 4 copies of a Julie Bonnie, which is a new card coming out at OP07. 5 cost, on play, one of your opponent's rested characters, or Don does not become active during the next refresh phase. That's really cool. Like a mini kind of, or like a real mini kind of Doflamingo there, but you can also affect the Don, which is actually pretty cool. Some cool things you can do with that. And then with our Don Quixote Searcher stuff, we got 4 copies of the Baby 5, we got 4 copies of the 2k counter, 4 copies of another 2k counter here. We've got 2 copies of the Sugar, which we're only going to get the on-play effect here because the other part of the effect doesn't happen because our leader is not a Don Quixote Pirates, but we can rest something with a cost of 4 or less. But the cool tech here is the Secret Rare Rosinante from OP04. So this is 8 cost, 8,000 power. Opponent's turn, if this character is arrested, all of your characters with base cost of 5 cannot be KO'd by effects. And then on play, you can rest this character and play 1 green character with a cost of 5 from your hand. So you can play out the X-Drake, you can play out the Cavendish, you can play out the Bonnie. All right, next up we're looking at Black Yellow Luffy. This is a first place one from a 3-on-3, quite a big tournament if that's the actual number of people that participated. But this is going to be fairly similar to a card what we're currently seeing as well. So for those of you who may have not seen Luffy yet, Black Yellow, 5,000 power, 4 life. By the rules, any face-up life cards go to the bottom of your deck instead of your hand, and then Don times 2, activate once per turn. You may discard a card from your hand. If you had 0 life, you can add 2 cards from your hand or your trash to your life, but they have to be characters with a cost of 5. So going over the staples for this deck, we're running 4 of the Baby Sabo, which allows you to bring out the bigger Sabo. So trash him, reveal the top card of your life. If it is Sabo with a cost of 5, you can play it out. We've got the Ace, same effect, but we're for Ace character, not a Sabo. 3 copies of that. Running 4 copies of the Luffy, which has the same effect there. And then in terms of their bigger counterparts, for the Sabo, we've got the 4 copies of the Black Sabo. For the Ace, We've got 3 copies of the Rush Ace, really nice. And for the Luffy, we've got a couple options here. We've got 4 copies of the starter deck Luffy, and we've got 3 copies of the new Luffy, which we spoke about with the KOing effect. We've got Garp, which is our searcher for all of those cards there, running a full playset of it in this list, and we're running a full playset of the other searcher, the Three Brothers event. The rest of the cards are kind of tech cards here in the deck here, running 4 copies of Hayori, just great in this because you can manipulate that top life. So you can make sure you've got a Sabo, Ace, or a Luffy in there. 3 copies of Ivankov from the starter deck 13. Cost you 3 as a blocker on play, trash the top or bottom card of your life, and reveal 1 character cost of 5 from your hand and place it face down at the top of your life. So just another way of manipulating life like your Hayori. The next couple of cards that we'll look at here help you to kind of take control of your life going down, which is kind of the strategy going into Black Yellow Luffy. You just kind of hold off swinging at them for a bit. Your Makino, on play you can add the top card or bottom card of your life to your hand. Then you can look at all your life and return them to your life in any order. Flampe is the other one that allows you to do similar effect. You add the top card of your life to your hand, then you draw a card. So it's just helping you edge your way down to that 0 life. And then your Gecko Moria likes to help you recycle all your little guys so you can get their effects off again with your leader's ability. Now we're going to take a look at one other list. Mostly the lists are going to look like the one we just looked at, but this is one that's got a few little different texts in here. So we've got the 4 Hayori, we've got 4 of the yellow Sabo from Starter Deck 13, the one that lets you KO something by trashing a top card of your life. Running 4 copies of Marco in this one, 4 of your Garb Searcher, 4 of your Baby Luffy, 4 of your bigger Luffy, 4 Flampes, 3 of your other Luffy, 3 Kuzan for some cost reduction stuff going on here and KOing, 4 Kuzan for cost reduction stuff going on here, 4 Sabo, 4 Gecko Moria, and 4 Three Brothers. So these 2 guys here, the 2 Kuzans, play nicely into the Sabo, which allows you to get some good KOing stuff going on there. So that's basically like another version you can run of the Black Yellow Luffy. And then rounding us off of our meta contenders, we're going to be looking at Gecko Moria, and truthfully this doesn't really change from what we're currently seeing. So let's just take a quick squiz through this here. So Gecko Moria, for those that don't know, attach a Don, rest 2 Don, discard a card, and then play a Thriller Barks character with a cost of 4 or less from your trash. So basically those Thriller Bark cards are for our Absalom, which is KO something with a cost of 2 or less. Your 4 Gecko Moria, which recycles a bunch of your cards there. Your Hogback, which helps you recycle cards again. Mainly fetching the Gecko Moria is probably going to fetch. Otherwise your Perona, running 4 copies of that, probably other thing you're going to fetch off the Hogback. Now taking a look at the other cards, there's cost reduction stuff. 2 copies of the Kozan, 4 Toshii, 4 Hina, 2 Helmeppo, 4 Suru, 4 Isho, all good cost reduction things going on right there. And the other things, we've got 2 copies of Brook here and 2 copies of Ice Age, both cost reduction stuff. Brook we've spoken about also gives you a KO there. You got your Sabo drawing, trashing, filtering your hand, Rebecca recycling things, Rob Lucci, 2 copies of KOing things. So yeah, it looks fairly similar to what we've seen already. And here's another list which has a few different texts in there, but once again fairly similar to what we're seeing here. 4 Borsalino, 2 Sakazuki, card we haven't seen for a while but seen some play. Got a first place here, 8-1, so not a bad option there. 2 Toshigis, 2 Hinas, 2 Helmeppos, 4 Surus, 2 Ishos, 4 brand news, a searcher, trashing things, Sabo 4 copies, Lucci 4 copies, Absolute 4 copies, Gecko 4 copies, Hogback 4 copies, Sindri, we didn't see this in the last build, something we do see now, 2 copies of that, Perona 4 copies, and then Ice Age 2 copies. And look, hopefully you enjoyed that popcorn, because that was actually a longer one than I expected it to be. But that's just kind of our dive into the OP07 meta stuff. So let us know what you think of what's coming in the future down in the comment section below. And remember to stay subscribed and notified for our other OP07 videos coming out very soon. But thank you so much for checking in. Stay beautiful, and we'll see you all in the next one.